Hi, this is Paul. I have to continue to ask your patience and forgiveness because I haven't just had time to put out a lot of monologue or commentary videos. I thought my conversation with John Vervaeke earlier this week was outstanding. You just got a taste of the conversation with Mark and Joey and Father Eric, and I'll get that whole conversation out when I can. I have to edit it because of a little mishap on my part, and editing always takes a while. But as with some of those longer conversations with quote unquote random people, I know they don't get too much attention, so I often take clips out of them to highlight some of the really important points and passages of those conversations, and the whole conversation will come out. And I didn't put out the clip on the podcast audio only channel, and I know about a third of my audience listens primarily that way. About a third of my regular audience. The podcast audio podcast channel is about a quarter to a third, sometimes half, depending on some of the most faithful listeners are the audio only podcasters. And I'm getting a lot of emails asking, when are you going to do Pageau Weinstein? That's what I'm trying to angle to. And so for those of you who don't know, I also have a Substack. And at this point, I've not monetized the Substack. The Substack is completely free. I would like to see Substack do a different type of situation, because I mean, you can, if you're subscribing to a dozen or 2 dozen Substacks for $5 or $10 a month, that would add up. They should probably have some sort of all-you-can-eat version, similar to, say, what YouTube Premium is. I think that, Substack Premium or something like that, I think would be a good way to go, because my guess is that in terms of people getting paid from Substack, there's a Pareto distribution there, and a few people are getting most of the money, and a whole lot of Substacks are getting very little money. And you could, I'm sure, a smart corporation and with smart programmers and mathematicians could figure out how to work that better. So like $10 or $20 a month, you could get all you can eat Substack, or at least certain channels in it. Anyway, so I do have a Substack, and it is completely free. And part of why I am do that Substack is because just today on Twitter, for example, somebody asked me, I've just discovered your channel. Is there a way to catch up? Now, I know saying that, some of you are probably like, that'll never happen. You cannot possibly go back over all of the PVK videos over the last 4+ years, nor should you. So the Substack is a condensation of some Twitter threads, and I've been using Twitter quite heavily, and often what I'll do after I release a video is the next morning, thinking about the video I released, I'll make some sort of Twitter summary or condensation or a few thoughts beyond that video, and that'll create a Twitter thread, and then I cut and paste it over to the Substack. One commenter said, it's a little disturbing to read on the Substack all of the Twitter handles instead of the names, so I'm going to try to remember to translate the Twitter handles into names. I do this because it's incredibly efficient for me, and if I'm going to continue to use these tools the way I'm using, I have to make sure that I use them efficiently. Anyway, some of the more recent Substacks, Jordan Peterson is made better by the women in his life. That was some reflections after the meeting in Santa Rosa. Jonathan Pageau and the monsters of the heterodox corner of the internet. And that was a video I made after my release of the Curtis Yarvin, Paul Kingsnorth, Spiritual Persons in the Machine. And this will give you a sense of, not only just because of time and the great fence of Florin, which we are building, which yesterday I worked cement all day, and I'm feeling it today because I don't work cement every day, and cement is heavy. Jonathan Pageau and the monsters of the heterodox corner of this internet. Pageau's flurry of pre-Easter conversations exposes rifts within the antithesis heterodox cultural space. In today's video, I do some commenting on Curtis Yarvin's talk with Peter Limberg. Oh, I didn't translate any of these down. Oops. I'll have to get better at this. I started basically trying to eat the elephant of some of the recent Pageau videos because there's so many of them and things are speeding up. And Pageau, I think right now, even more than Jordan Peterson, is sort of located at a really critical nexus of a whole bunch of things. Why start here when there's so much Jonathan Pageau material that needs covering? Because the four major conversations, and I'm going to add a fifth one today because of the video I was just watching, his conversation with Brett Weinstein, Benjamin Boyce, and James Lindsay, Paul Kingsnorth, and Dr. Jordan B. Cooper require that we do some mapping. The mapping has to deal with the question, what is the nature of civilization, of the civilizational crisis we are facing, and what are the apocalyptic eschatological paths out? That's really where we're at. Now, just today, by virtue of something on the Clips channel, I discovered the First Things Foundation, and they have something going on with rabbits here. I still haven't figured it out, but seems like pretty much an Orthodox group there, and conversations with, I forget the name of this fellow that he talks to, but the channel is the First Things Foundation, and it was publicized on April 5, 2022 with only 5,000 views, so not all of the Jonathan Pageau herd has discovered this conversation. I caught it because there was a clip from the Clips channel on it. But I found this, again, to be a really important conversation. He's had a couple other conversations with this individual, so I subscribe to the channel, and I'm going to check this out further and might even comment on it more. But you just throw this on top of the pile. Also today, someone sent me on Twitter this conversation with Andy Crouch on technology as mammon. And this very much gets at the Paul Kingsnorth end of this conversation. So, what is the nature of the civilizational crisis we are facing, and what are the apocalyptic eschatological paths out? By having these conversations, Pageau offers himself as an interesting frame through which we see the antithesis, as David Fuller at Rebel Wisdom likes to call it, options on the menu against the current dominant Western blue church cathedral machine narrative. The thesis narrative is one of now post-Christian Protestant secularity using technology to move a post-human narrative forward. And so I'm sort of coalescing individuals. So Paul Kingsnorth would be deeply skeptical of technology, as would Andy Crouch over in the evangelical sphere. The thesis is that, well, we're going to technologize our way out of this. The progressive liberationism is increasingly giving birth to a transhumanism. This recent Rebel Wisdom conversation between Paul Kingsnorth and Mary Harrington and Foley David, I think, sets the table nicely. And I played a little clip of that in the video that this Substack is sort of a summary of. Part of the difficulty, opportunity of the moment in this little corner of the internet is that which holds the heterodox community, another David Fuller term, is the resistance against the hegemonic thesis institutions. And so what you have are all these little players sort of lined up against the big blue church cathedral. Back before I had Civilization on a computer, when I was in high school, myself and my other nerdy friends would play these little hex games. And one of the little hex games that I used to play was a game called Ogre, where you had this one massive tank against all these tiny little tanks, and you had to see which would win. Now, this is a common thing that happens in culture wars, because you have the giant establishment hegemonic thing, and then you've got all of these dissidents and differences and disagreements. The difficulty that, of course, always happens is that once the hegemon is brought down, one of the little ones will rise up to become the hegemon. And this is the perpetual difficulty with revolutions. And this is obviously well known. And then what happens is, of course, that the the new hegemon then takes on all the dynamics of the old hegemon, and the whole system starts again. And that's why revolutions, even though people think that revolutions are apocalyptic and eschatological, they are not, because revolutions go around in circles. Get the word? You don't even have to know much symbolism to get that. But yet, in the madness of revolution, there's always the idea that, well, and then of course the Who put it into words, we won't get fooled again. Oh, we won't? We do again and again. And this is what sort of sets up the earlier conversation I had between, let's say, the Anabaptists and watching the Pageauian sort of monarchism, because was Jesus a revolutionary? I think you have to say no. Jesus was, in a sense, a counter-revolution, because Jesus is the son of the king. And so you wind up with all of these relationships. And one of the things that I never really anticipated talking about, but it seems I think we likely will be talking about it, will be monarchy, and what monarchy looks like in the coming dispensations. Now, it's helpful to remember that monarchy, there are monarchies around the world today, but if you're in a weird Western power, monarchy feels decidedly anachronistic. Yet don't forget, the Brits and the Dutch, they still have kings and queens, as do the Spanish. You have all those monarchs in Europe just sort of hanging around, biding the time, waiting for their day to come. I've been listening to The Rest is History on French prime ministers, and there's a decidedly monarchist element to these French prime ministers. They almost reinstantiate aspects of the French monarchy. It's really a remarkable thing. These systems, of course, one level up, begin to manifest things that are deeply perennial. So anyway, we're going to have to continue to sort of map these mimetic tribes in this space. So part of the difficulty opportunity of the moment in this little corner of the internet is what holds the heterodox community is the resistance against the hegemonic institutions. It's sort of the big tank versus the little tanks. This makes the heterodox space to some degree always reactive, and that reactivity is antithetical to the sort of institution building that is necessary for sustained human reformation and flourishing. This is something Jonathan Pageau pointed out in July 2020. If you want to build a civilization, you cannot do so on words like dark, rebel, and heterodox. By using these identifiers, you can criticize existing systems effectively, but you will never build anything of value and coherence. And after I posted this, because of course all of this is part of a Twitter thread, David Fuller reposted it, which is I've got a world of respect for David Fuller because he has a capacity for self-criticism. Beware of people who do not have a capacity for self-criticism, because they are either under the sway of something, and that something might be themselves, or actually far larger. This is where Curtis Yarvin is a perfect foil for Jonathan Pageau. They're both deeply conservatives. And now some people challenge that, and rightly so. Are they reactionaries? I mean, trying to figure out how to figure out who Curtis Yarvin is takes a little doing, partly because he writes such long blog posts. A number of people pointed me to his critique of circling, which were some very interesting blog posts. I was tempted to make a video just on that because, as Mark likes to point out, we're in an intimacy crisis, but I really don't think in this dispensation we can have intimacy as broadly as we want or desire, and that's basically the reason behind monogamy. Anyway, I gotta get a drink of water or iced tea. Mouth is getting dry. I commented they're both monarchists, and someone said, has Pageau said that? I don't remember which conversation I had with Jonathan. We were going back and forth. It's in one of the videos. I don't think it's in the prophetic video. I think it's in the one before that. Jonathan basically admitted to me, he says, I guess I'm a monarchist. And a monarchist is in many ways exactly who Jonathan should be, given everything that he keeps telling us he is. Now, maybe I should send him a note and say, Jonathan, let's you and I have a conversation about monarchy. This gets very weird because, of course, democracy is very Enlightenment focused. Now, Enlightenment atheists will very quickly say, no, we get our democracy from Athens. And you're going to have to sort of deal with the historical record, because the demos, I mean, people who sprung out of the ground in Athens were citizens, and those on the outside were not. So there's a lot of deep things there, and Tom Holland continues to mention that as well. This view of the masses coming in. Christianity is this amazing religion that seems to hold together so many opposites. And that's part of the reason Pageau keeps talking about Jesus Christ connecting the, running up and down the hierarchy. Christianity is both dramatically egalitarian and absolutely hierarchical at the same time. And how Christianity manages to do these things is, nobody's smart enough to think this up, so it must be God. I'll just say it that way, much to the chagrin of many of you. So let the comments flow. Yarvin has done more than many to expose what Paul Kingsnorth calls the machine, or as Yarvin calls it, the cathedral. This was the interest that Peter Limberg had in bringing Yarvin onto the Stoa. The deep difference between Yarvin and Jonathan Pageau is, of course, overt, explicit public Christianity. It's simple for someone, let's say, who believes in a democratic system like I do, to still say the Lord is king. We sing it in our music. We sing it in our songs. He's the king of the nations. He's the king of the democracies. And many Christians have for many years found ways to sort of try to square democracy and monarchy. Both Yarvin and Pageau are monarchists. Yarvin is a political monarchist, while Pageau is a religious monarchist whose monarchy begins in heaven, not in the image of the corporation. And that section from the video, all the way at the end of the Stoa video where he talks about monarchy, was interesting. And again, I should go back and read some more of his. He's on Substack now, and most of them seem unlocked, so that's helpful. The difference is not small. It is everything. You can see that in comparing Kingsnorth to Yarvin. Both are deeply reactionary, but Yarvin finds eschatological apocalyptic hope in technology and corporation, while Kingsnorth finds it in limitation. Just, again, recently, or just today, in fact, someone sent me a link to this podcast. It's a David French podcast, Good Faith. I've got the Dispatch has all these little sub-podcasts, but he's got Andy Crouch on there. And Andy Crouch has been writing a book, or maybe it's out now, I don't know, on technology. Andy Crouch has very much kept to the sort of the Christian cult of limitation, I'll say. And I was very much raised in this cult. I mentioned it before. Ron Sider, Christians in an Age of Hunger. Anabaptists, and this is very interesting because, of course, there's some real tensions between Pageau and the Anabaptists, even though Pageau did his missionary service with Mennonite Central Committee. So it's a situation of sort of like opposites, where Anabaptists really love to talk about revolutionary Jesus. Pageau really likes to talk about King Jesus. And again, a lot of this comes through in this conversation with these First Things Foundation people who clearly are working overseas very much in harmony with the kind of work that Mennonite Central Committee did, and are clearly Orthodox. And so in the reality that Christians bring strange things together, that's what's happening here. As we continue to pursue this heterodox taxonomy, we'll see more interesting relationships unfold, and Pageau again will be an interesting frame. We see that with James Lindsay in his talk with Jonathan Pageau and Benjamin Boyce. Sort of stands with Jordan Peterson as a classical liberal and also an ardent monarchist Protestant, or modernist Protestant, hoping to retard the impending post-humanism, but only back to modernity as seen in this conversation. The most amazing thing about this conversation was the revelation of James Lindsay as a deist. And now, Benjamin Boyce, with those pretty blue eyes, coming in close for the soft, smooth, voice of persuasion or voice of conversation. You know how Benjamin does it. Benjamin's got way more tricks up his sleeve than what he admits in his little channel there. I mean, you think it's just all about dealing with all the gender stuff. Oh no. Benjamin's got bigger fish to fry than just gender. Trust me on this. And I don't say that in sort of a conspiracy way. Benjamin he's the son of a preacher. He continues to work. He just knows that a lot of his audience is a little religious reactive, but that's the stuff that Benjamin is really interested in, and that's really where this relationship with Pageau and James Lindsay sort of comes together. Now again, being anti-woke, James Lindsay is sort of the knight of anti-wokeness on Twitter. I mean, he really is. But see, I'm trying to figure out which conversation should I start with in this whole thing, because Lindsay and Peterson are the modernists. They're the Democrats, as you will. They're the Protestants. And, again, they're all anti-woke, sort of resisting the hegemon. But like I say, just because everybody is together resisting doesn't mean they're all together in terms of their eschatological, apocalyptic vision of the future. This is where Bret Weinstein comes in, because he imagines that human beings must be the savior of the world against this sort of Gnostic demiurge of genocidal genetics that push their way into the future. Jonathan Pageau keeps trying to argue that Bret Weinstein morality comes from heaven. But there is no ontology for that source of information in Bret Weinstein's world. The Pageau-Kingsnorth conversation was perhaps the most subtle of these because they share orthodoxy, but I suspect Kingsnorth hasn't yet worked through all the implications of his new religion in terms of his apocalyptic eschatological imagination. That's why the upcoming conversation between Ben Kingsnorth and Mary Harrington, when they start talking about ways forward, will be very interesting, because generally speaking, if you're in all the little tank groups resisting the hegemon, the main or the first thing to do is take down the hegemon. After that, and you see this in revolutions all over the place. And so what revolutionaries often tend to do is often just sort of reconstitute the hegemon, just in different forms. The Pageau Jordan B. Cooper, for me, was important because the current crisis is going to force Christianity to address its schisms and begin to work together in its mission to the world. And this is why, again, Pageau himself is an interesting figure, because his father and mother changed from Quebecois Roman Catholic to evangelical. Pageau himself goes off to Africa with Mennonite Central Committee only to become Orthodox. And here he's talking to a Lutheran and, of course, also a Calvinist pastor. So things are coming together, and Jesus might be putting the gang together again. That's certainly what Christians have been praying for since John 19. Or John 17. All of these conversations are not random. Jonathan Pageau is the prophet of purpose, of course, and he's illuminating patterns on how reality lays itself out. Part of getting through this corpus will be to see the apocalyptic eschatological nexus as a battle of spirits. Now, one of the videos that isn't on Jonathan's channel that he participated with is, of course, this story maker video, storytellers, is that what they are, about Pacific Rim and the symbolism of mechs and monsters. And that's sort of where I ended the inspiration for this Substack, and hence got into the title, Jonathan Pageau and the Monsters of this Heterodox Corner of the Internet. The only question is where to move first. Because on one hand, you've got Pageau talking to the modernists. That would be Weinstein, Peterson, and James Lindsay. On the other side, you've got Pageau talking to the, did I say the monarchists? I should have said the modernists. Then you've got this emergent monarchism, or maybe this emanation of monarchism, because can monarchism really come from below? Isn't it weird how we are talking about monarchy? Monarchy. The strangeness of this journey continues to both fascinate and just befuddle me, but yet here we are. I'm going to start on what is probably the video least watched, and therefore nobody has asked me to comment on this video, but they jump into the deep end.
On Watar. So let's just get into it. So I was reading some of your brother's book.
John Hears. Okay, that's his name.
And I kept going back to my favorite author, Girard. For whatever reason, I'm told.
Now, is he saying Girard or Girard? Are we dealing with the Girardians here? Because the fight that's going to happen around René Girard is going to be immense, because I see it already brewing now. There's sort of a fascination about him, and he's got some loyal mooks out there, and there's some knights that are rising, and there's also a fair number of you out there, because I'm reading the comments, who are very anti-René Girard. So is he saying Girard? Let's keep listening.
Don't read Girard, but whatever. I don't get into that conversation too much, because he had some perennialism going and whatnot. But in the end,
he had some perennialism, and you're concerned about that, and you're talking to Jonathan Pageau? There's nobody, and just wait till you hear how he treats this question about the fall and the Enlightenment. There's nobody in some ways that's more perennial than Jonathan Pageau in this stuff.
And I can't escape this, and your conversations online, they seem to go together, which is something like the Enlightenment is a second fall. It's a type of re-embracing of the original sin. And what do you think of that? Is that a pattern that seems real and true, or is it too much, or is it too dark?
So here's another one of the tensions in the system. Of course, we have the modernists, who are the sons of the Enlightenment, all the way to the extreme where you have the atheists, who basically say, who basically find everything of any substance in the Enlightenment, hence the name. And here you have this guy saying, is the Enlightenment a second fall? Second? Meaning there's no other one significant enough between the first fall in the garden and the Enlightenment? Wow. So you can't really pitch, put something at the other end of Steven Pinker. That's that sentence.
No, I think it makes sense. I think that, whether it's the second fall, I think that we have to kind of understand the fall is something which is that happened at the outset, but is always present. Like, it's always
something fairly perennial.
It's happening, you could say. And so you can fall, because even in scripture, it's not like there's one fall. We tend to, there's a fall in the garden, but then there's a fall which happens at the level of Cain, and you can see that they're analogical even in the way that they're treated, because the curse that God gives Cain is like the same as the curse to Adam, but like one step more. Where he tells Adam, you by the sweat of your brow you will till the soil, and he tells Cain, the soil isn't going to give you anything. Like, you're not going to get anything from the soil. You're going to be a wanderer, and you're not going to have a home, basically. And so
now, again, if you listen to Jonathan Pageau's video on Enoch, which is an outstanding video, all of these issues that Andy Crouch is dealing with, that Paul Kingsnorth is dealing with around technology, this is sort of becoming another battleground where Kingsnorth leaves the environmental community because they used to be limitations, humanity sort of keeping to its lane, but now the answer to all of our environmental problems is more technology. Technology got us here, technology will fix it, but this is sort of doubling down on the Enlightenment, and that we need to keep the Enlightenment going. Well, is that just basically continual perennial falls?
It's like Adam gets chased from the garden, then Cain gets chased from the earth almost. Like, he's just going to wander and not going to be able. So you can see that there's like levels of fall, and you can understand that the process from Adam to the flood as succeeding falls, kind of fractal falls at different levels, into the creation of weapons and the creation of the metallurgy and the corruption and sexual sin and all of this mixture. The problem of the Nephilim, all of this kind of is all these compounded falls until the flood. So I think that we can definitely understand the Enlightenment as part of that, and relate and can help us understand the fall even, right? Because it does have to do with knowledge that is misused or used for the wrong reasons.
And dehumanizing. There's something about that total embrace that started this mechanistic worldview where I feel like we're in this pattern of dehumanization. Does it end with?
And again, the Kingsnorth conversations are just steeped in this type of thing. So you have these little tanks versus the hegemon, and they're sort of coming together.
With a flood again, though, this is the crazy pattern.
Well, I mean, I don't know, like, it ends in fire, I think,
Right.
This time it doesn't.
Now, James Baldwin, he's our revelator. Or, of course, the environmentalists are worried about the flood too.
Maybe not end in water. It seems to end in fire.
Can I ask a personal question, Jonathan?
What?
Do you ever get like sad that you always end up delivering these kind of messages?
Like, he's like, the end is nigh messages. Yeah, definitely.
Jonathan Pageau is going to look for a ship heading out to Tarshish, but he knows very well how that trip goes.
I think more recently, more so, because I think it's difficult, because as things speed up and as things progress and as these narratives kind of, let's say, all come into each other, then all of a sudden it's hard to give the good news. Like, there's good news, but the good news is after a difficult time. Like, it's hard to when people.
Like resurrection is after a difficult time with some Romans?
I was saying you're negative, but it's like, yeah, but I mean, you can read some of the text when things weren't going right in the Old Testament. Some of the stuff that's being said is not positive. And so I don't think
that's to be respected. That's what I think impacts so many of us who listen to you in all these conversations on this sort of subculture called whatever this is, orthodoxy and postmodernism. You return to the principle all the time, which is really helpful, because it's not negative to be negative. It's negative in light of the tradition, and the Old Testament's pretty negative. So it's not like you're just making up negativity for the sake of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I respect, and that's what Girard is doing. He's saying in this Rape of Man in Nature, that what's happening is not because I like it or wanted to, or you're bad people. It's because we've embraced an idea that is empty. So talk about that. Is the Enlightenment, it never feels empty when I watch an engineer build a building in America and they can't do it the same way in Sierra Leone. It feels full, but then the building actually turns out not to have salvific powers. It's almost like, look at it. And then if it's filled with ugliness, it almost didn't matter. So how do we make sense of, like, is it actually empty, this enlightenment?
Yeah.
Does it bring something rich to us? I don't know.
So, I mean, I think the best way to understand it is to kind of understand it really through the story of the fall. Maybe the best way to see it is. And so you have Adam and Eve, they reach up for a form of knowledge, which they're not ready for, is the best way to understand it. They are not disposed to receiving this knowledge. And so
those of you who know Calvinist words might be familiar with infralapsarianism versus supralapsarianism. That comes into play in this little space here.
They take it, they kind of reach into the secret, you could say, and they rip it out of the secret. And then they have to deal with the consequences of that knowledge and of the fact that they're not ready for it. That's what the fall ends up being. Because there are many traditions, you see it in Saint Ephrem the Syrian, you see it even in Saint Irenaeus of Lyon, the notion that God's intention was to give Adam and Eve the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, but not on his terms. That is, when God discerned that it was the time to receive this knowledge, they would have gotten it, but they took it for themselves in desire. It's important to understand it's in desire, because in desire for power. Right. In a desire. So it's weird. It's like a weird thing because, that's why.
Now, again, Andy Crouch, these books on power, in some ways, Andy Crouch has sort of been in evangelicalism charting this course. I should probably have him on the channel. I don't know him personally. I don't like reaching out to high status people, because the conversations with high status people, unless both sides know each other fairly well, don't necessarily happen well. But it's interesting that Crouch is sort of following along in the same lines.
A lot of people struggle with Orthodox Christianity because we say things like, God became man so that man can become God. And people are like, whoa. Isn't that what's there in the garden? Right? Isn't that what Adam and Eve's doing? And it's like, you have to see it in its proper place, which is that was the plan for God all along. Right. Was to make man participate in God. But it's not for us to take it for ourselves to increase our status and power. It's for it to be revealed to us in the proper moment. And so reaching up and taking those knowledges and desire is what leads to the problem. And so you can see that in the Enlightenment, you have the problem of technology, which was there in the story of Cain. The human beings reaching up towards patterns which are true, bringing them into the world in order to increase their power, increase their capacity to.
Now, there's a lot that you need to get into with that in terms of motivation, in terms of timing. And it's obviously a particular take on the Enlightenment. And of course, whenever we talk about these things, I've got Jordan Peterson and his comments from Jung. If someone knows where Jung wrote about, basically, I should probably look it up and get it, because Peterson repeats this often. So Rick, Rick, find it for me, Rick. Rick said to me the other day, because we meet together on Fridays for the Q&A and then on Sundays for the live stream, Rick said to me, you only see me 2 days a week, but I see you 7 days a week. It's like, ooh. But Peterson always says of Jung that Jung said something to the effect of, what did he say? The effect of that the Christianity got tired of waiting, and that the results of waiting weren't living up to their expectations. And so they basically reached to resolve the sufferings and the struggles of the material world rather than waiting for God to bring it down to them, something of that matter. And of course, that's where something like alchemy, which of course Peterson says to people often about Jung. And again, I don't know very much Jung, but I know some of you people do. Peterson says, of Jung that, if you don't pay attention to what he writes about alchemy, you don't know Jung. That's interesting. A lot of people just probably look and say, well, Newton played with alchemy, but we don't pay any attention to that. We just look for his mechanics. And Jung was fascinated with alchemy. We don't pay any attention to that. We just want to know how to do psychology. So, but I would imagine these things aren't incidental.
To do battle to others, increase their strength compared to other nations.
Yeah.
And so you can see how there's a relationship between the nation state and the Enlightenment. There's a relationship between modern warfare and the Enlightenment. A lot of the Enlightenment thinkers, they hate to say that. They want to think that it's all about being rational and being reasonable, but there is a direct relationship between the developments of those.
In other words, if you have an arms race, and I think about this with like Andy Crouch's admonitions about technology, and there's just the sense of, in a competitive world, this is where we're going to have to, again, at some point get into Brett Weinstein and Jonathan Pageau. In a competitive world, limiting yourself with respect to technology sounds like a Darwinian losing hand.
These different aspects.
It makes me think of the prodigal, Christ's prodigal son. It's almost like the Enlightenment thinkers got into the pig pen and then found something really cool and then said, we're going to fix this pig pen up, and have been fixing up the pig pen ever since. And it's a pretty cool pig pen. The problem is it's not.
That's an insanely good analogy.
Fullness. It's not true light. It's like a lesser light, right? In the pig pen or something.
But the story of the prodigal son is one of the best stories to understand this, because it's a good story of the fall. It's a great story of the fall, because that was the child's inheritance.
Right. It's his.
It's his. Wait. It was his. He just had to wait for his father to give it to him.
That's good.
But because he takes it for himself in desire, then it leads him into corruption and into chaos and into the pig pen, basically. And so, like you said, one of the things that happened in...
Now I want to interject here, because one of my pet peeves in Luke 15 is I agree with Kenneth Bailey. Kenneth Bailey was a scholar in the American University in Beirut, and you can find a lot of cultural commentaries on the New Testament by Kenneth Bailey. He studied the Arabic, basically he studied Arabic commentaries before, the rise of Islam. And so he's very cognizant in the symbolism of that world. And whereas everyone imagines that out in the pig pen, the son converts and has a change of heart, Kenneth Bailey, and I know a bunch of you don't like this interpretation, Kenneth Bailey says no. If you read the Arabic commentaries, again, this is before Islam, and so many Christian commentaries were in Arabic from that part of the world. If you read the Arabic commentaries, they all notice that the speech on the lips of the prodigal son, who has now decided to return to the father, is the same speech that Pharaoh has. In other words, I would tinker with John Hare's really quite brilliant analogy idea to say that, in fact, the son wants to go and, in a sense, become a rebel and take over the father's house. That really makes it something of the fall. And it's only the father comes and won't listen to his rebel son, says put a ring on his finger and a cloak around him, and we're going to kill the fatted calf. And of course, the older brother doesn't like that either.
The Enlightenment is to say we don't need, not everybody in Enlightenment, but the general movement of the Enlightenment is to say we don't need God. We've got all we need in order to increase our own power, to increase our lifespan, to understand the world. So we're going to do it that way. And it's not that those patterns were untrue. Right. It's that they were taken and applied not in reverence towards God, not in reverence towards the source of all things, but in a kind of in a practical desire to increase your power.
Is the Enlightenment in that way an intentional forgetting? It feels like we are going to forget this. Stop trying to remember it. We're going to forget that we came from the great mansion, and we're going to build this. Almost like it's pride, which again takes us back to the garden on some level.
Yeah, it's pride, and it's also it's a natural circumstance of being cast out of the garden, because when you're cast out of the garden, all of a sudden you're afraid of death. You notice your fragility. You notice, and so you have to bolster yourself. There's no way around it. You can see that you're going to die, but that death doesn't have the same meaning as it does, in the crucifixion, in the story of Christ. So it's like, it really, and they understanding the Nietzschean, I mean, obviously Nietzsche wouldn't have agreed with this kind of military interpretation of his will to power, let's say. But in the end, that's what one of the things that ends up playing out is this weird, like, will to power and desire to protect ourselves and to be safe.
It has to play out that way.
Yeah.
Again, with Girard, what he says is if you just take Francis Bacon, Bacon's anticipating the world after the implementation of the scientific mind. He's really brilliant. I mean, he's kind of, I don't know what you think of Francis Bacon. To me, he's weirdly not deep, even though his ideas have caught on everywhere. But when you look at him trying to explain the world to come, man, he's like, this is not only what we have to do, but isn't it going to be fun? And I guess the answer, and Matthew talks about it. The question is, but is it in alignment with reality? Your project might not actually be related to your being. You might be becoming dehuman. That's this dehumanization idea that keeps coming up in our work and in my mind, which is like, what does it mean to be fully human and aid someone? Is it make them work in the image of your idea, or is it simply to serve their idea, no matter how odd their idea may be?
Now, this is where, for me, the conversation gets very interesting, because and anybody obviously who follows me knows of my history, my story. My family for generations have been in vocations of helping, and helping is tremendously difficult. And this is where the Anabaptist tradition is so rich. Mennonite Central Committee, tremendously effective community. But it's been interesting that many of these helping communities, and in fact some of the helping factions of these communities, have found wokeness to be so irresistible.
Empty to become full, or do you bring somebody something so they might eat and become like you or something?
Yeah. I see what you mean. So, I mean, I think it probably has to be a meeting of those two worlds, like a meeting of that which I have, and how does that fit or relate to that which you need or that which you think you need. Mm-hmm. And so it ends up being, if it's properly done, helping someone can actually be an act of true communion, because it's not, there are, like you said, those two tendencies are there in the world of aid, where you have, this weird top-down UN kind of nonsense where they come in and they're like, okay, all girls going to school, we're going to put in $100 million and we're going to get all the girls to school. Oh yeah, I know it's real. And not only are we going to get all girls to school, but the money you get for any other project is dependent on whether or not you take this money to send all your girls to school.
We're seeing this in Georgia right now. Yeah. In the Georgian Republic in the South, we literally are trying not to work with these organizations because everything is tied to something else, and ultimately it's an agenda. Yeah, you're right. Sorry.
Yeah, it's an agenda. All right, so that's the top down one, and so then you also have another thing, which is basically the idea of like you said, whatever that the person says they need is what I'm going to give them for. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I mean, that that's okay. You just have to be careful. It's not just enabling, right? Because it's like I can have a friend of mine who says, well, what I really need right now is a 40 ounce of scotch. Like that's what I need. And I want you to give it to me because I don't have any money for it now. And so there has to be a kind of encounter, a loving encounter where you find the balance between the two, because you often, as someone who's trying to help someone else, you do have something to offer, but you have to be careful because you also maybe trying to just make the person in your image, which would be more idolatrous.
And there's the tension. And so again, to follow the hegemonic thread, the blue church, the cathedral, the machine is in many ways a modernist liberal Protestantism that has basically grown out of Christianity, and certain elements of Christianity sort of explode out of the frame. It becomes progressive liberationism, and that then becomes sort of the hegemon. And so, yeah, if you want this other kind of aid, you've got to give daughters education. Now, again, I'm not against giving daughters education. I have educated all of my daughters equally to what I have educated all of my sons, to the best that I can. And I have no question about that. But beneath it is, it's very similar to having the Skid Row gospel station and say, you want the sandwich? Gotta listen to the little talk. If you give your soul to Jesus, you can get a sandwich. There's commonality. It seriously annoys, very progressive woke types when I point out the fact that their mission overseas is just a reiteration of 19th century Christian colonialism. It's a new colonialism because you say, well, people should be autonomous. So you're going to go to Africa and tell them about how they should run their sex lives? And again, I'm a Protestant. I'm happy that the British leaned on India and said, yeah, no more women dying with their husbands in the funeral pyres. That's got to go. I'm happy that the British said, yeah, to the Muslims in North Africa, yeah, no more slave trade. That's got to go. But you can't have it both ways.
So would you go down the line of the CRT, the critical race theory people, the colonial mindset is the one where I'm not really interested in what you think you need. I have something great and you take it. That feels colonial mindset to me. The problem is the way that that ends for them. It ends with, I guess, the colonial people have nothing to offer as opposed
which is not true. Which is not true. I think that's the reason why the rich help the poor is because the rich have something to offer to the poor. And Saint John Chrysostom says, it's wonderful. He says, the reason for the rich are the poor. Like they're the reason they exist is to give to the poor. It's very powerful. Very powerful statement because he's not saying there should be no rich people evil. He's saying, no. He's like the actual reason why you exist is so that you can offer in your riches to those that don't have. Wow. And so, but I think but then there's also something often that the rich have, which is education, which is some know-how, which is all kinds of stuff, which is not just money, resources, all kinds of reasons.
Now, lest we forget, know-how and technology, almost the same thing.
Resources. So I think that there, like I said, it's difficult because it only works in a world of true relationship. Like it only works in a world of true communion where you know the people you're giving to. You've gotten to know them. You've taken the time to relate to them, to kind of see what their foibles are, to see what their strengths are, and they get to know you and they know, let's say, what you're interested in terms of helping others. And there's a kind of synergy which finds itself in between those two. So the CRT people, and the CRT stuff is so agenda driven. There's another political agenda behind it. It has very little to do with often that which is. It's also a grab for power. Like not even a grab for power of the minorities that they pretend to represent. A grab for power for the people representing their theory. That's what they actually want in trying to implement that.
And again, if you listen to The Rest is History, one of their early episodes on communism, Tom Holland's like, well, communism is sort of secular. Communism is sort of secular Christianity in some ways. And in fact, the connection is so close that I was looking at, there's a guy on YouTube, he's a Lutheran pastor who, we're using the same lectionary. I'm not using the Revised Common Lectionary. I'm using the Narrative Lectionary, which comes out of the Lutheran Church. And, he's there in his video. He's talking about the oppressed. And again, it's absolutely legitimate for Christians to talk about the oppressed. And I'll go all the way, showing my past in liberation theology, that God has a preferential option for the poor. And you get that right from the Old Testament. However, what that becomes then, especially in a secularized version, especially in this sort of weird Gnostic historical evolution track that Marx has, that can very much become a fetishization of poverty. I've told the story before. Back in my college radical days, I was going down to Nicaragua to tour the revolution during the Sandinista period and government. And I remember I was there, and one of the other girls that was going on the trip was like, "We're going to meet the poor." And I thought, really? You don't have to travel to another country to meet the poor. And it's not like you're going to meet Jesus or the Pope or some great rock star. They're just people. Yeah, they're poor, and poverty is this, and you get this, poverty is this, blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the poor in spirit, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The Luke's version of the Sermon on the Plain. So there's all this nuance and particularity about the benefits of poverty and the benefits of wealth, the liability of poverty and the liability of wealth. Lord, give me enough that, that I might not. You can find this in the book of James, where I need enough to not be filled with pride. I don't need, if I have too much, I'll be filled with pride. If I have enough, if I don't have enough, I might be tempted to steal. All of this idea about sufficiency and limitation. And of course, it's so interesting that Kingsnorth comes all the way around back to this from, sort of a radical environmentalism. And it shouldn't be surprising, because that was already there in the Christian nugget that sort of flexed way out to the radical environmentalism and has now come full circle. And that's the kind of environmentalist he is. And that's why he could sort of spot the fetishization of technology. We tend to fetishize. There's the word for this. Oh boy, Grim Grizz is going to meme the heck out of this thing. We tend to fetishize all of these different aspects. If there's a good, we will overplay it. That's how we are.
You need to rather find, I think I mentioned you, we work with the Mennonites. That's who we were working for. Mm-hmm. And I think I've rarely seen an organization that was as good, at least in my experience. We were there on the ground. We saw other organizations, and when I was back in the mission days, right out of seminary for me, working overseas, Mennonite Central Committee, top tier organization in terms of respect for relief and development in the developing world. Really did have that balance. I remember even my supervisor saying things like, you have to be attentive to the community. We spend months just creating networks, right? Creating relationships. But then she said, you also have something to offer. Well, you're not just a vessel for money. You actually are a person that has skills and love, and you have all this, and you have that to offer as well. And so you have to not pretend like that doesn't exist.
Well, that was one of the toughest things for me back in those days, to kind of get my mind around that balance and to figure it out. And that's why mentorship is so important. And really thankful to mentors like Ray Brinks, who, was my mentor in the DR when I first got there, to to teach me some of those things.
Is this the fig tree? So I always try to tell our guys that if you plant yourself properly and your seed is, oriented properly, and the soil has something like nutrients, you really should produce fruit. And I do think the fruit can look something like material gain. It's not like material gain is evil. In fact, it's really the opposite. You should bear material fruit. Does that sound right in terms of?
I think so.
The proper path?
Jesus says so. Why don't we can trust him?
Right. But it's also like a weird irony of Christianity, which is that in Christianity, there's a sense in which material gain actually comes from self-sacrifice. And it's very surprising, right? It's the surprise of the monasteries that are constantly becoming rich. It's like they live in this sense of poverty and of self-sacrifice, but then they always end up becoming rich, because that's actually, there's a reality to that, like you said, which is that if you plant the seed properly, rightly, in truth and in beauty and in goodness, then the fruits will come.
So what is I was just at St. Anthony's, and we buried my mother, memory eternal.
Sorry.
Yeah. But I walked into the monastery there in the middle of the desert and was hit with that very, very profound moment where I said, these cats they got stuff. They got a lot of stuff. They're rich. And so as a person operating in the world, when you feel that, what's the explanation for why that's okay? Is it that
now when I listen to this, it's like, what St. Anthony's is this? So again, somebody let me know if I'm wrong. So I looked up St. Anthony's Monastery, and it's there in the desert. So I looked at St. Anthony's Monastery in the desert, and well, yeah, you got a lot of gold. So you have, and part of what Protestantism and especially the Anabaptist tradition really rebelled against was the power and the wealth of the church and the clergy. For me, growing up in very much a be poor for Jesus culture. Yeah, just watch Zeffirelli's Saint Francis. These things will never make you happy. I remember watching that in college. It was a favorite movie for myself and a friend of mine, and inspired us to at one point almost leave school and just Viv Grigg came and spoke at the seminary, the poor among the poor, and so all of these tensions. Few more pictures from, and so it comes as this dramatic surprise for me to see this circling around, and this is the form of Christianity that now becomes new, and I'm just fascinated and bewildered by this.
it's the physics, it's spiritual physics. It should look like that, which gets really weird to the gospel of wealth. Is it like that?
No, I don't think it's like the gospel of wealth, because
I don't think
the
so.
reason why they're doing it is not to gather wealth. I mean, at least you hope that the reason why they're doing it, and it's the joke, right? It's the joke of, it's a weird joke of Christianity, right? Which is like the hermit goes out in the desert and is just like, leave me alone. I just want to pray. I just want to be with God. Leave me alone. Then he can't do it.
Life of Brian.
It's impossible.
Just keep following him around.
Exactly. It's impossible for him to end up alone, right? To St. Anthony, they actually like hack away at his thing and like pull him out of his hiding place to say, like, teach us, bring. And it's the joke of the greatest bishops were always the monks that ran away from being bishops, and the people would have to physically get them, bring them back to the seat and say, you're the bishop, you stay here. And then they're the greatest bishops, right? There's a sense in which Christianity's fruits are in self-sacrifice. And so I think that if things are done with the right reason, and the worship
Right.
of God and the desire for transformation, then there will be like physical accumulation. But then if it becomes then the reason for it, like if it becomes the reason for their actions, then it's going to fall apart, right? Look at all these wealth churches. They're all scandal ridden to the core now. It's like,
Right.
Now, it's easy to point fingers at megachurches and televangelists, but let's go and look at the history of, look at the papacy at the time of the Reformation. I mean, there's a reason, and when you think, what's the sense making? You don't really have newspapers yet, and the printing press is just in its infancy, but you look at, buying and selling of papal offices, and, the Reformation happened for a reason.
What are all these documentaries coming out about just how corrupt these different...
And it was so interesting in Paul Kingsnorth's first appearance at Rebel Wisdom, when one of the persons was like, well, maybe the Orthodox Church hasn't been so caught up in politics, and it's like, and then, of course, now in the midst of all of this, you have Putin and the Patriarch of Moscow and all Russia celebrating Easter. And yeah.
Different big wealth type Christians ended up being corrupt because it's not something that you can avoid. It's like if you act for material gain, then.
So as a philosopher and an artist in Canada, is America do you think America's roots are in...
This whole conversation was just fascinating.
The immediate material hope to gain something in this world, and therefore it has to end in something like a greed fire. Like, is that what America is? How do you see America from where you sit?
I think it's ambiguous. I think America is an ambiguous figure. America is it really is like the end of the world, and it tends to have in it like all the three elements in Revelation, you could say, a good way to understand it. It's like, it seems to really have the beast there. Like the beast is there. It seems like the whore is there, especially in California. And then it seems like there's also, I'm joking. Then there also seems,
especially in California. Surely you're talking about Los Angeles and not Sacramento.
Though, to be the woman with her child, right, who is taken up. And so you have in America a weird microcosm where you have the craziest of like imperial systems, desire to control and to dominate. You also have the chaotic fringe of mixture and of excess and of porn culture. But then you also have that monastery that St. Ephraim's monasteries in the US have been weird, like oases. And then you see that in all kinds of places. It's not like it's the only thing, but
a land of
I think
extremes.
that's what America is. It's like a weird microcosm that's playing itself out.
That's how I feel when I come home. And I love the places where we work. I mean, we could talk about, global South culture, developing culture, but the woman who goes right up into heaven, I feel that when I come home, and not just because it's my home. There's something about America and freedom that's real. It's real. It really does provide a type of freedom. And I do think it kills the noose. I mean, I always think about America and Thomas Jefferson for some reason, and the story of Constantine. Here's what I mean, is the Greeks and the Greco-Romans had a Republican democratic heritage of sorts.
Yeah.
And then the Byzantines, for lack of a better word, the later Romans, they adopt Christianity and then have 1,000 years and more where they don't turn to their Greco-Roman Republican past.
You have to be careful. Like the Byzantine Empire still has a certain Republican flavor to it. It's not exactly a democratic republic, but there is a sense of citizenship,
a confederation, right?
And there's also a sense of citizenship which is not so present in the West with a feudal system. There isn't this sense of like being owned by your lord, and that that the lord owns all the land, and that everybody there is owned by the lord. This kind of simple hierarchy that you find in the West, which has its function, but in the Byzantine Empire, you don't seem to have something as not that exactly that kind of relationship.
The emperor's relationship to the people is different than in the Middle Ages in Europe, and
I think so. At least that's my understanding of it. I mean, obviously, it's a long time to say what exactly the culture was, but it seems like there was still a sense of citizenship that continued on in the concept.
And land ownership was different in the Byzantine Empire, for lack of a better word. Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And there was the emperor's relationship with the people.
They called themselves Romans.
Was much different than the kings. Now that could be because of the way that land was broken down and owned. But long story short is those Greco-Romans, they don't really run to embrace Pericles' democracy, but the American deists do. And so what I find interesting is I feel like the American deists, Jefferson and Franklin and these cats, what they're trying to do is something like throw off the shackles of perhaps an improper monarchy. But I also think they're
King George
trying to say something like, we're going to double down on this notion of human independence in a way to allow everyone to chase their monetary desires. I don't have a problem with that.
And of course, let's not forget that a lot of people during the COVID restrictions were, not saying, Romans 13. No, a lot of monarchists in this little corner of the internet were saying, this is a sign of the beast. And so, oh boy, I'm going to get comments on that comment.
But it plays out all over this country. And now I wonder if it can't play out anymore. It can't cohere.
Mm-hmm.
We've created such a hyper individualism and such the notion, the value that I am somebody because I've made wealth. I don't see how it coheres. Can it cohere in your mind?
No, obviously, no, it can't. The world can't cohere around material gain. That's absolute nonsense. Like, there's no way to understand that's possible. And it can work for a little while, just
modern corporations be damned.
Like the world can cohere under political unity for a while, and the world can cohere under trade for a while. But if it's not directed towards the highest good, then it's always going to break down.
Is that why we're running toward a type of globalism? It's the next coherence. It's the only way to sort of give people meaning is through this global move.
It seems like that's what people think, and it's interesting to notice how the globalists use very explicit tropes of the Tower of Babel, for example, in order to represent their own movement. So they get it, they know what they're doing, but there's also a way in which, just in terms of just for practical reasons, the idea of a completely interconnected one world culture is just not possible. It's just not possible. It becomes fragile. It becomes fragile because diversity, when they say the joke that it's like they're saying diversity is strength, like in Canada, like diversity is strength, but not alone. And unity is needed too, but it's not alone. You need unity and multiplicity in order for anything to exist properly. And so these weird desires to like emphasize on one hand extreme diversity, like absolute diversity, but then reach up for like absolute unity in this like one world type of culture. It's not gonna work. It's not gonna hold.
You should see West Africans trying to wrestle with this, because so the West African experience is first I'm a Bambara or a Mende, Well, first I'm my father's son or daughter, and then I'm a Bomber or Mende or Temne or whatever ethnic group, and those bonds are alive and well.
Yeah.
But I don't want to bust on the West, but the glamour is in the electronic devices, and it's in something that they keep hearing, like a unity that leads to wealth. And so the gospel of wealth is blowing up in West Africa right now. And so but everyone knows it's not really who they are, but maybe it's who I need to be in order to serve my family. But they don't have the vocabulary. And so what's happening, I'll just speak for Sierra Leone. What's happening is,
and what he's talking about there is why people move to America. And they, on one hand, I need to be here. I was talking to a Tongan pastor. They never paid their rent. Drove the deacons nuts. But I was talking to a Tongan pastor. He would take his children back to Tonga every couple of years so that they would, see their grandparents and know a little bit about where they came from, et cetera, et cetera. And he's like, these children, they want to eat breakfast cereal. In Tonga, we go and we just pick the food right off the tree and just have the papaya. But it's also important to remember that globalization is over 500 years old. The Columbian Exchange, we associate things like tomato sauce and spaghetti. I mean, it's so many, or potatoes with Ireland. Guess what? Potatoes are not native to Ireland or the Netherlands. So this stuff is so difficult.
Is Sierra Leoneans are just fodder right now because they just know they need to catch up. And that message has just been driven home by media. The problem is they don't even know really what that means, except for become Westernized. And it's rough. It's rough. And I don't know how that changes with these technologies. I don't think it changes, right? They have to enter.
It's like, you really need Betamax. You need to be like the West. Really? Because it's going so well there. Well, at least it is on Selling Sunset.
Or two into the interweb. Is that what's happening? Everyone will enter.
Yeah, I don't think that it's avoidable at this point. I see the story. I see the story playing out. I think that we need to be deliberate about, let's say, creating.
Deliberate is in some ways just a half step away from rational. And again, I'm not throwing rationality under the bus, but this is what makes this all so difficult.
Arcs are creating alternative possibilities, but I think that if we think globally, like, I don't see another way. Like, I just don't see another story playing out, especially now. It's like things are accelerating at levels that I could hardly imagine a few years ago. So we're moving towards
part of this. The war is part of this, right?
Yeah, definitely. But COVID and this war are definitely being used to bring about whatever change needs to happen to create this thing. The idea.
All right, doom and gloom Pageau. Here we go.
Of these unified.
King Ahab, don't you have a prophet of the Lord? Yeah, I don't like to talk to him though. He always gives me such bad news.
Digital identities, all of this stuff is happening. It's happening at speeds that are hard to understand.
Oh, I just saw this thing today I wanted to share with you. There is a new service called the Eternal Prayer NFT, where you can commemorate your prayers for all eternity on the blockchain.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Whoever thought of that is like an evil genius.
I know.
Has to be a Protestant.
But you literally are given an NFT representing your prayer, and it's like a perk, which I didn't think prayer was supposed to include weird perks on your computer.
Yeah, so basically your prayer is inscribed on the blockchain.
Right.
That's how they do it. Yeah. I mean, Whoever thought of that is an evil genius, that's for sure, man. The blockchain, all of that stuff is scary. It's scary stuff, but people don't.
But Pageau's on BitChute and Odyssey.
I mean, there's the how can I say this? Like, the way that things are moving are, in terms of the relationship between the digital and the church, is something that we really need to thank God we're Orthodox, at least for a little while. I don't know how long it's going to work, but at least for now.
The Orthodox are in some ways beating the Protestants in the internet game. I mean, that's where this stuff gets so weird. And I'm not, throwing shade at Jonathan or anything like that. I'm on YouTube. I'm on the blockchain through Odyssey. I mean, I'm not some purist Essene out in the desert that you're having to haul me out of my cell. But this is where, if you want to know where I'm going to end up, it's salvation is of the Lord. It shouldn't be a surprise. But yeah, I'm not casting doubt on the fear and terror that Pageau is seeding here.
Now you still have to take the bread and the wine in your mouth. Like, you can't do it through a screen, right? We can pretend for a year, right? 2 years that you're going to communion on Zoom, but at some point, whoever continues that eternally is going to stop existing as a church. Like, the Orthodox Church is a smells and bells and bowing down and kissing, and that's what the Orthodox Church is. And you won't. It'd be very difficult to rip that out completely out of the church.
Well, it's an embrace. The way you said that is an embrace to smells and bells. And when I first came into the church, I heard that as negative, but now I fully understand. No, man.
Now that you've been to church on Zoom for 2 years, or like however long people have had to do it, like, you better be grateful for those.
I was watching the guys with their headphones on out by the bells as I walked in, doing the monastic, the call. Yeah. And I just thought, you young guys are the best. Look at you. You're saving me, because and I just thought, that is some loud, great noise, and I'm a part of it. Yeah, you're right. That was I think that was the battle too. I mean, we don't have to get into that, but I do think all the bishops were trying to decide, what is this to us? And I think we all know now, right?
Yeah. I hope so. And I also hope that, I hope that everybody, the difficulty is that what happened during COVID is that it was normal that at least at the outset, there would be some compromises that would happen and that you would have to make those, but hopefully we can heal from those compromises. Some churches went very far, and I think not just Orthodox, but in general churches in America and in Europe. And I think some won't survive this.
Mm-hmm. No.
Because they just went some things got broken.
It makes me think that as much as we're tempted all the time, Jonathan, in our work to go and do a ton of internet stuff, which we do, we're trying. Really, it just boils down to sitting there long enough in front of someone who needs assistance to understand. And by the way, that smells and bells, right? On some level. Yeah. But
there's a way in which that, even in terms of humanitarian aid, it's like if you talk to someone on the phone or you meet them through a screen, you don't get the same impression that if you sit in their yard, or if you sit in their house, or if they come to, there's all these, and this is not even like a religious moral argument. It's like you get things from people that you don't realize. You get intuitions that are implicit in your experience from being in physically with someone in space.
But what do you do then? Because the irony is crazy, right, for you, because you've created a community of screen people.
That's right. Well, hopefully,
but maybe, I think maybe some people, they already existed. You didn't create it,
No, but
this very much follows on my conversation with John Vervaeke.
I think that might be one of the things that I've said it before. And I don't know if some people in the symbolic world community are a little, I don't know if they're annoyed with me or maybe or not. I don't know, maybe if they understand what I'm doing, but I've actually been pretty aloof, actually. And so I don't get too involved in a lot of the discussions because I don't want people to think that I'm like some guru that they can replace real community.
Decoding the Guru is going to be after Jonathan. I don't think they have an episode about him yet. He would be interesting. Well, part of the problem is that people always, and myself included, people always address what they see, and people see from their own filters. So they would, especially if they listen to anything that I've said, that crazy monarchist.
With it's like, no, go to church, dude. Go to church, go to confession, like go take communion, or go play basketball, or like you need to participate. And so I think the online space offers something which is powerful, actually, which is powerful in the strict sense, right? Of enlightenment powerful. Like it offers you a lot of power. But it's also not, it has to be connected to real communities. It has to be connected to family. It has to be connected to things which are embodied,
Well, that's the mediation. I love the idea in Matthew's book, and really your work, is that heaven and earth are all contained. They're not somewhere else. And so it's the mediation, right? Again, it's the thing you talk about all the time, which is it's heaven meeting earth is where we actually exist. And so you've got to have both. So I don't mind like having an online presence. The question is that your presence? Because that's all heaven, right? That's all. I don't know. That's the question for you. Is the internet real?
Is the internet heaven?
In the spiritual way, things are real, like, or is it a simulacrum of reality? What is it?
So I think the way to understand in general, like if you want to understand in general the increase of means in general, is what they tend to do is they tend to increase extremes. That's what the increase of means do. And so that's the way to understand the internet, is that it's a place of extremes. And so and so in a manner, it's actually like the union of heaven.
This makes sense on a Pareto distribution conversation too.
And earth, which is not completely connected. So it's actually, it's not a very strong connection. And so because of that, it can go into...
It's perhaps like the gap of a spark plug.
Into the darkest, lowest places. Mm. And it can also like go up into very abstract, So for example, like you can, on the internet, you can meet people who think exactly like you, because there's 100 million of people online. So you can actually like encounter patterns of thinking that are so similar to you that you could never do that in the world. So that's an extreme, but that's not real community, right? So there's a problem with the extreme, because that too much unity can be an idol. That's the best way to understand it, because it's like I feel much better, right, if I'm around people that think exactly like me all the time. It makes me feel good, makes you feel like things are in order because we all agree. So it's like this nice little idol that I can hold on to. But the world is far more messy. And so let's say a parish, for example. A parish is the type of people that you'll encounter in a parish is not the people you chose. Just like a family too, right? I mean, you choose your wife, but like, is it your kids? You don't choose your kids. You don't choose your parents.
Maybe you choose your wife.
Choose your in-laws. And so these relationships end up being more resilient, actually, in the end, because they join this unity and multiplicity together in a healthier way. They're more microcosmic. They represent the world in a better manner. Plus, the internet is too extreme.
Plus, bodies are by bodies. Does that matter? Like I can actually smell somebody.
Yeah.
It feels like that's the earthen part of our
for sure
of deep reality, right? Like we have to smell you or something.
The internet is alienating. It's an alienation because I'm still here in my body. I still have part of my experience that's here in this chair, right, drinking my coffee. Mm-hmm. But there's also a part of my experience that's projected into this pattern space. And so it's like there's an alienation which is inevitable in that relationship. It's just built in.
So is the inclination, or should the inclination be, I think we have it in First Things right now, which is every time we do something internety, we then invite people to meet in person on, we're calling these KP weekends, where we all get together.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It feels like it's a good inclination, right? It's a wholeness.
That's a great, I think it's a great initiative to understand that in order for the messiness of relationships to build resilience, they kind of have to be embodied, at least to some extent. It's very difficult to but you could have different ways of structuring it, where you could say at least some groups like meet together, but then maybe the groups, when they meet together, sometimes they do it online, and then maybe once a year
estuary
come together in person. Like there are ways to find a hierarchy, but you definitely, I think you definitely need some. It's crazy. Like I can see the difference, because during COVID I didn't go anywhere. I was just here, and then finally someone invited me to speak at the OCA, in Florida for the Diocese of the South, and I was like, man, I had forgotten what it was to to hug people and to have, just to be there with people and to eat and to and to just feel sometimes even feel someone's embarrassed or feel someone doesn't know what to say, and all of that kind of messiness. It was like, wow, it feels so good to just be with people.
Oh yeah. And make mistakes. I had this just as you were speaking, like, you turn and we're going to turn this camera off in a second. And then it's almost like that's it now. and I don't have to worry about anything that happened. Now it's recorded, but the mistake is somehow okay. But if I made that same mistake, or I didn't say what I wanted to, and I'm standing with you, or I said something, I have to live in that moment where I'm going to see you again. Lord have mercy. And then on the other hand, I don't think, Jonathan, and I know you think like this too, the things that you've patched together, I really think of it as a subculture. I know we're part of it, because the people we recruit all come out of this conversation. Those are high level.
I got to talk to this guy.
Well, I call them spiritual in the sense when I talk to our guys. You and we, or people, are having high level conversations on the internet, and then leaving those traces of those conversations in a way that is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But need to be embodied. Is that what we're saying? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Because you can imagine
Brim Grizz will be down for this.
You can see the caricature, because the caricature exists, which is, the guy who's interested in orthodoxy and spends all his time online,
Ortho bro.
Going to watching all these YouTube videos and seeing all these Orthodox memes and doing all this, but then just doesn't go to church.
One of my church planter friends, young people, guys coming in, thing he said to me about orthodoxy, everybody comes through here, I'm going to be Orthodox, and they never go to church. So a little bit of when someone says, oh yeah, I'm going to be Orthodox, it's like, how much do you want to go to church? Because, Holy Week in Orthodoxy, you're going to church a lot. Or you're going to be nominal. And, this gets into, I was having this conversation about orthodoxy and Jake Meter from mere orthodoxy, not that orthodoxy, Protestant orthodoxy. But he was, he basically said, church attendance in Russia and church attendance in the Orthodox places of the world is tiny. I don't know if it's probably not tiny everywhere, but you've got this huge nominalism, and so it's easy on the internet to pull up pictures of St. Anthony's and say, oh wow, well there it is, it's Constantinople reinvented in the desert of, oh, where'd the pictures go? It's reinvented in the desert of Arizona, and here it is, and This is what I've been looking for. Well, if you've been looking for it, then go. Because looking at pictures of it, I'm doing that right now too, doesn't make me Orthodox. In the words of Keith Green, very definitely not. Large O Orthodox, going to McDonald's doesn't make you a hamburger. Not even going says a lot. So if you're watching this video and not just listening to it, you'll notice that I'm wearing a different shirt because this is now Friday instead of Thursday. What happened yesterday was that sometimes I forget which hand I'm clicking, and sometimes I turn off the recording. And so the commentary on the last 12 minutes of this video didn't get recorded. I had a whole lot of fun with it, but it wasn't recorded, and it was Thursday. I was like, oh, what am I going to do? Maybe I'll just send it out as is. But then I thought, no, I've got question and answer on Friday, so I'll leave that be, and I'll release this on Monday. And that gives me time on Friday to finish the commentary on this video, because this really is, this is really a wonderful conversation. And the end of it is what was on the Clips channel, and the end of it is really very good. Now they're talking here about the it's like the story of a church planter friend of mine who, you know, his church, like many of our church plants, is quite a bit more liturgical. They do Ash Wednesday, they do weekly communion, and so someone who is, let's say, interested in this new trend, even in Protestant churches, will say, oh yeah. But then he'll have people, he told me once, he said, you know, the people that leave my church because they say, well, Pastor, this was good, but I really want to go to an Orthodox church. He said, none of them go to church. They left because they wanted to go to an Orthodox church, but they didn't go. Why? Well, Orthodoxy is demanding.
See the caricature, because the caricature exists, which is, you know, the guy who's interested in Orthodoxy and spends all his time online, you know, going to watching all these YouTube videos and seeing all these Orthodox memes and doing all this, but then just doesn't go to church. Like that exists. That really exists. That exists. I mean, that really exists. People who are Orthodox because they are theologically all this, and they live in this online world, but they're not even catechumens sometimes. They're not even, they've never been or been once or twice in a parish. And I think that's a dangerous space to be in, because Orthodoxy is messy.
Oh, you've been accused. You've been accused. I'm just telling you, already know.
Well, church is messy.
Yeah.
My brother's been accused, probably me on some level, of sending the guy to church. Thank you very much. And then the guy just is assassinating the priest with every thought because that's not what Jonathan said. Yeah. But here's my point to you is we know this.
Like it says, God forgive me for whatever part I have to play in that. You know? Like, yeah, but you're right. That's definitely the difficulty, because Orthodoxy is messy, and it has a grittiness to it, and it has an embodiment to it, and it does.
So after the question and answer today, I jumped back on because I always have to change the thumbnail and do a few things. And so I was back on the Bridges of Meaning Discord, and there's always sort of an after party after the Q&A, and Cassidy was there, and a couple of others who have gone Orthodox, but there's the Russian Orthodox, and there's the Greek Orthodox, and there's the Antiochian Orthodox, and they've got different practices when it comes to things like weddings and music. And so, you know, Pageau is right. It's messy. And you thought just Protestants were messy. Oh no, it's messy all over.
Doesn't negate the reality of everybody's broken sinfulness and their broken relationships and all of this. And so there's the ideal, but then in the world, none of it happens the way it's supposed to. And that's actually part of part of reality. That's
part of what should happen.
Yeah.
Which is nuts. Will you do one last little piece of conversation? Just five more minutes.
Sure.
Vervaeke.
Yeah, John Vervaeke.
Vervaeke. Yeah. That John Vervaeke. What's up with him?
And all these cats. Yeah. Especially Vervaeke, who's a Neoplatonist.
Oh, yeah.
More minutes.
Sure.
Vervaeke.
Yeah, John Vervaeke.
And all these cats. Yeah. Especially Vervaeke, who's a Neoplatonist by his own admission. Where are these dudes in this conversation about Orthodox? I think a lot of people listening to you want to know this. Like, do they ever turn to you when the microphone's off and go, yeah, Jesus is nuts. Stop talking about Jesus. Like, you know,
Actually, I get much more. It's the Christians on my channel that, for a long time were like, don't talk about Peterson so much, talk more about Jesus, and be like, well, go to the church channel. You hear me talk about Jesus all the time there.
Oh, and Jordan Peterson's one of them too. Like, you have an entree into a world where a lot of us are very fascinated by this conversion moment. What is it like? What is actually happening out there on the side conversations? These cats think you're crazy when it comes to that, or is it more like,
I don't know.
If they thought he was crazy, they wouldn't talk to him. I mean, John and Jordan, just listen to how Jordan promotes Jonathan. I mean, and both of them do. They both think really highly of Jonathan, as do I. If I thought Jonathan was crazy, well, I enjoy talking to crazy people, but I don't think Jonathan's crazy at all. And, I think this guy needs to he needs to listen to a little bit about what's going on with this estuary concept, and that, it is all about the mixing, and we're doing it online, and we're doing it. We got to get this guy over. Maybe we got to get this guy over for a Q&A at the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, and give him an idea of all the mixing that's going on.
I don't think so. I really
so.
don't think they think I'm crazy. For sure, not Paul Van Dyke. I mean, Paul Van Dyke is a legitimate Christian.
Yeah, he's a Christian.
Yeah.
I'm a legitimate Christian, though. There we go. I can breathe easy now.
John, I think, is honestly trying to wrestle with his own story, right? Because John grew up in a kind of very fundamentalist Protestant sect that was very, very protective and very, purity minded and shame minded and everything. And so he was very deeply wounded, I think, by his experience, and felt like he discovered in cognitive science and in Buddhism a different way of seeing the world, and a release from that type of relationship. And so
I had a conversation with someone today, and estuary was always something that I had dreamed about at a local level. And then, as Joey noted in the video that I released on Thursday, the guys at the local level felt an obligation to bring it to a different level, and it's been something that's going on around the world. But the conversation I had today with somebody just helped me see that in some ways estuary is a lot of what this little corner of the internet is about, as Jonathan is describing it here. It's a Calvinist minister and a Orthodox symbologist and a cognitive scientist from University of Toronto, and all of you, where we're all wrestling with what we received when we were young and what's happening in the world, and trying to piece it together in a very live thing. And it isn't a threat to our convictions. Our convictions may change. Lots of my ideas have changed and grown in the last 4 years. I remain a minister in good standing and a Protestant, and Jonathan remains Orthodox, and John Vervaeke continues to develop his ideas of Neoplatonism, and how that he tries to sort of repristinate and update Neoplatonism, and he's seeing how in past centuries Neoplatonism intersected with Christianity and other traditions, and Jordan Peterson continues to try to figure out where the narrative and the physical meet, where the upper and lower registers come together. In many ways, estuary, as practiced in John Van Donk's ElseNet network for training estuary leaders, as practiced in Chicago and in Germany and in other places. This is what's happening online, and it's happening in locales, and in locales they can participate in it. And so it's interesting. I like this question because it very much impacts. This is what we're doing. We're talking together and learning and growing from each other.
I think this is my interpretation. John can, if he ever watches this, he can contradict me. But I think that what's happening for him now is that he is kind of surprised and happy to find aspects of Christianity, to find Christians that are showing him another vision of what Christianity is. And he on himself, he's reading St. Maximus now. He's reading he's reading Eugenia, some of the Western theologians, and is changing even the way he's talking about things. And so for me, like talking with John,
and that's so remarkable in a space like this, because I always say hierarchies bind and blind, but John remains humble and very real in his conversation. He's, there's a critique by the new atheists of Christians that they're too frozen and stuck, and John doesn't identify as a Christian, and John isn't frozen and stuck. John is in fact being very vulnerable and honest for his audience, because in many ways, this is in some ways the heart of my channel too, and the exploration of my monologues and my commentaries, is that I need to think out loud. And when I think together with you and you think together with me, well, I believe that the God of the universe, there's one God, and we are his, and he will lead us into truth. And so he leads us by his word and by his spirit and by each other.
I think it's a process, and it's a process that a lot of the people that are watching my videos are on themselves. And it's the same with Jordan Peterson. It's just that what happens is that, this is my interpretation, is that I'm talking with Jordan Peterson, and Jordan is presenting his own existential objections or his own existential doubts, and I'm trying to answer the way I can.
Right.
And then they say, all right, well, yeah, but no. What happens is that there's 1,000 people watching that are saying, you know what?
That was the right face.
Right? You know what? Actually, I think I'm willing to take that extra step. And so I think that's a lot of the things that are happening.
That's exactly what's happening. And what's amazing is that's exactly what Rationality Rules says is happening too.
Now, if we combine this with his needlessly verbose language, his lack of transparency, his reluctance to distinguish himself from actual Christians, people who actually believe that Jesus literally resurrected.
like the crying game moment with Jonathan Pageau. You don't really believe? Yeah, I do.
And his remarkably long-winded answers, which give ample opportunity in and of themselves for others to smuggle in theological concepts, then it becomes very easy to see why Jesus smuggling can so easily be associated with Jordan. So, I originally intended to wrap up here, but while relaxing last night, feet up, playing pit people with Johnny Walker in hand, but not really, because no one actually likes Walker. We just pretend that we do in a contorted attempt to honour God the Father Hitchens. I did what I normally do while gaming. I listened to YouTube videos. And in this specific case, I listened to Destiny.
And what I like here is that, well, here Rationality Rules is he's inhabiting the audience that is undergoing the transformation.
Interestingly, he essentially voiced the criticism of Jordan Jesus smuggling, but in reference to politics.
The problem with what Jordan Peterson does is Jordan Peterson makes a lot of descriptive claims, but he never makes any normative claims. So Jordan Peterson will say,
which is, of course, the one claim he makes is it's full of normative claims. So that makes no sense. I don't understand why he even in fact said that.
Things like women are not as happy today as they used to be. Women and men don't get along in the office. Men tend to be better at this thing. And then that's all he ever says. He never takes a step further to make a prescriptive claim to say, like, what should we do about something? And the problem is
you should clean your room.
People will take the things that he says and then they jump to very bad places. Kind of obviously, it's where
very bad places. They might clean their room.
You would expect someone to go based on what he said, but then he never takes responsibility for any of the kind of normative leaps
I'm glad he doesn't come around and say, I take responsibility for that clean room.
people make off of his descriptive ones. And that's kind of the annoying thing with dealing with Jordan Peterson.
And here, Destiny is, as he often is, bang on the money. Jordan doesn't necessarily smuggle bad ideas himself, but he facilitates an environment that makes it incredibly easy for others to do so. He doesn't say that women should fulfill the role of looking after children, but he does clear the path for those who do. Given this, the question is, how responsible is Jordan for the damage done by his rhetoric? How much
How the damage done?
responsibility is on the cross on his back? Truth be told, I don't know. I'd like to know your thoughts, so you can let me know in the comments, but what is for certain is that he bears some responsibility. Jordan Peterson is not a Jesus smuggler, but he is a Jesus smuggler.
I guess Jonathan Pageau must be a Jesus smuggler then.
Oh, and it's beautiful. And I like the messiness of it. It's the proper space, I think, in a postmodern world to be able to venture into these. I always think of postmodernism as just a preparation for a return to something like, fulfillment in God and orthodoxy. Yeah. It has to. That's why I never understand people's anger with, of course, postmodernism produces nuts stuff. Don't get me wrong, but it also is ripe. People forget the 1895 is a terrible time to live if you're a Christian. It's a highly mechanistic time period. It's the death of mystery, man. And now you have this weird birth of it. Now, don't get me wrong, it creates a lot of problems, but it feels richer for people maybe from the ancient Orthodox East than
I think so. But one of the things that's hard, and I understand, it's like people listen to me or they watch me talk to someone like John Vervaeke or to some occultist or to some weird
somebody with 666 in their name,
some weird atheist or like I just recorded a discussion with Brett Weinstein and I can understand because they'll listen to me and sometimes I know what they're thinking. They're thinking, why doesn't Jonathan say this? Like why doesn't Jonathan tell them the truth of Christ? Like why doesn't he lay it out, lay out orthodoxy for them? And I'm thinking, that's not how real conversations work. It's just not how, I don't think that's how real conversations work. And to a certain extent, I don't feel responsible. I don't feel responsible for the manner in which that person will or will not have a glimpse of the grace of God. I don't think that I actually have the role to do that.
Nor the control. That's what God's Spirit, that's what the Holy Spirit does. That's why becoming a Christian is not at the end of a rational syllogism. It's much more like falling in love than buying a sensible used car.
I can only say the things that shine in front of me as I'm encountering them and trying to figure out what they think and trying to get them to see certain things a little differently. And so sometimes it can be frustrating I know, and I'm sure people criticize me for that because they're like, why didn't he say that? Why isn't he talking about, the divine energies or whatever it is that Orthodox theologians talk about? It's I try to,
because that's what I'm going to have on. I'm going to be an Orthodox street preacher. I'm going to get one of these black robes and I'm going to get a sign that says divine energies available now. And, I'll be right by the guy right down Florin Road that says, what does this sign say? It says, it was so funny because there's two sides. One of it is, Jesus is Lord and Jesus is God too, something like that. It's a hilarious sign.
Have conversations,
But it's the rationalist's impulse because they think just one more rational expression of orthodoxy will get them over the edge because they're.
It's very much the master and his emissary, and it's a whole bunch of emissaries talking and say, if you just lay out and assert the rational propositions, then people will say, oh yes, and no, never. It's a faulty anthropology.
Working with a rationalist template. And I just never find Christians come to Christianity that way. Well, at least the ones they don't. It's not like one more argument. Oh, just the right word. Oh, you did it. It doesn't.
I love this guy. This guy's just absolutely hilarious.
It feels that way to me.
Yeah. Well, some people definitely come to Christianity, I think, through reason and to a certain extent, because Christianity is rational. There's a limit, right? Because
Come on, Orthodox people, it's the Spirit of God. Take it from a Calvinist.
Yeah. I guess I'm pretty radical. I always think my mother, memory eternal, she was so good at this, Jonathan. She would never leave a moment on the table.
I love this part of the video. She would never leave a moment on the table. Oh, by the way, I've got this for you to read. Oh, by the way, would you take Jesus as your Lord and Savior right now because I said so?
For that Jonathan Pageau, so many moments on the table. And I was always thinking, Mom, the moments you're identifying are your moments in your mind at a certain time. They're not even heard by all these other people the same way, probably. Yeah. And so I like the probably.
That Jonathan Pageau, so many moments on the table.
The space there is a space of humility. I'm not going into your mind right now because I don't even know. Maybe it's not even the right thing to say. I like that humility rather than the sort of Great Commission, Protestant.
But back to the Protestants. But and what's so funny is that you do meet people who they got saved because there's a guy out there who, they got Philip with his Jesus signs, and Philip never leaves moments on the table, even with the Hooter girls. Never leave a moment on the table, even at Hooters. Don't leave it on the table at Hooters. But Philip will tell you. He's got some great stories, Philip does. Now, he might have one great story in 1,000, but it's messy. It's messy indeed.
Moment of way to go. I just don't like the way to go moment in the Christian conversation.
But it also depends. So what I think one of the things that I hope that one of the things that I'm doing, the way that I'm doing it, what it affords me is multiple conversations. What it affords me is the desire for the person to talk to me again. But if I was in a moment where I'd be like, I just slap it on the table and be like, this is the truth. This is the way it is, and everything.
And that's exactly right, because it's not just the moment of crossing the line. I've just finished my rough draft for Saul on the road to Damascus, and that's the beginning of an entire process by which his transformation is going to pull the Roman Empire through a transformation that has continued to this day. And so it's not, what can we hear from Jonathan Pageau? Well, Jesus is Lord and pattern, and that's it. No, that's not it. That's not the way people work.
Then I think most of the time the people I talk to won't want to talk to me again, and I would understand why they wouldn't. And so I would make the Orthodox happy, because they'd be like, yeah, Jonathan is saying the thing. He's saying the right thing, and they would be right.
He's saying the magic word.
Right, that I would be saying the right thing. But in the end, I don't know if the fruits of that in the long term would be good. I don't know. I mean, and if some people are doing it that way, that's totally fine. But for me, I can't. I'm also just not an arguer, a guy who argues a lot. I just don't like to argue anyways.
Would you be called an empath in the world?
Yeah, I'm more empathic. I try to kind of understand where the other person is. And then I try to show how what I'm saying connects to their world is the way that I tend to do that.
Well, that's what I always say. I always say I would rather be a teacher than, a propositional provider. I don't want to provide a proposition for you to have to force you into a corner. It's uncomfortable for me. On the other hand, man, I do hope I'm a martyr when the time comes, if it comes. I do hope I say the proposition properly in English so people can hear what I'm trying to say, I believe. I do want that.
You're right. I mean, there's a way in which I think that it's not about, I hope that what I'm doing is not about avoiding in order to be accepted by others. man, if I go down that direction, I hope a priest will smack me on the side of the head and say, okay,
All this violence.
Jonathan, like get back into the truth. But yeah. So
there it is.
Yeah, there it is.
Anyway, that was a terrific conversation. So I let a lot of it play through this, and I had ideas about how to title this, but the problem with doing it in 2 days is I don't remember a lot of what I said before, so I might have to go back and take a peek and say, oh yeah, this is what I was saying. So I hope this hung together, even though I had to do it in 2 days. I didn't want to lose the ending of it. It was just a terrific conversation. And leave a comment. Let me know what you think.